Hey y'all, back again with the video I didn't expect I would be making. If the different setup and visible earbuds and microphone setup wasn't clue enough, um, I am not in my usual recording setup. I am not in my usual country. I am en route to, as I record, and will be at, by the time this goes live, D&D in a castle. So I thought perhaps I might have to do my reactions to episode 5 and 6 in one video, but it started occurring to me that I was already going to be delayed when I could watch episode 6 because I'll still be at D&D in a castle and in an even worse time zone for catching it live than I normally am. I am normally 3 hours ahead of broadcast time. So it starts at 10 o'clock my time on a work night. And I'm now 5 hours ahead of my normal time zone. So we're talking 8 hours. And there is no universe in which I'm physically capable of getting up in the middle of the night or staying up that late. So then I'm trying to catch up on that episode when I come home and I'm getting ready to go back to work and trying to record a combined video for 2 episodes during my normal lunch break. So that is categorically not happening. However, baked into my travel plans was a day of downtime, which I was going to use to walk around and explore a new city, which I did. And then my feet started hurting a lot because my boots are great for getting through airport security and not great for walking around all day. And I have to stay up late enough to help my body clock reset to that 5 hour ahead time jump. So, since I have some time, and I at least have a microphone, it's not my good microphone, so I apologize if the audio is back to bad. I decided that since I did manage to finish watching episode 5 before I left for my trip, that I would go ahead and do honestly more of a first impressions video since I did get to watch it twice, which I normally do watch the episodes twice before reacting to, but 5 and most likely 6 are probably going to be after only watching once. But yeah, I'll still make sure this is scheduled so that it doesn't go up until Tuesday so that people who rely on watching the YouTube release of the episodes don't get spoiled. Though if you're watching I don't know how long this is going to be, but based on my previous ones, 40 plus minute video entitled Reactions and Thoughts on this episode, you know you're heading into spoiler territory. Um, but yeah, so I'm diving in after only one watch through and not having listened to other people talk about it, which is going to be a bit new. So we are kind of going on what I caught for Critical Role Campaign 4, Episode 5, Branching Paths. Um, So our cold open starts with the soldier's table, as we were told at the end of the overture that it would. Um, and I'm, for the most part, going to be trying to note lore and geography, things that caught my attention that I think will become relevant later on. Obviously, we did get a lot of world building with the Japanese mountains versus the King's Road, um, direction split. The thing that just caught my attention that did come up a little bit later was that apparently the storm rack, which is, I'm going to guess, an area racked by storms almost perpetually, is seemingly very close to Dol Makyar. So though the Orcish lands in general, from what we've heard, have seemed to be better protected in the wake of losing their god, or improved in the wake of losing their god. Um, we did learn in episode 3, I believe, with talking about the Hallowed Round, that Dol Makyar was kind of the borderland, like, last Orcish city before you got into the was dwarvish and human territory. Um, so if things started going topsy-turvy in every region after losing their god, I'd be interested to know, if I missed it, I apologize, which other race, the Stormwrack, used to be their ancestral lands. I believe, based on what was discussed in the Hollowed Realm, that the Dwarvish territory was the one that abutted Dolmakiar most closely. But I am fully prepared to be wrong about that, especially as I hope we learn more about the dwarves later. I have loved everything Brennan has introduced about his take on the lore of the different species in Ahriman, and I have recently played a very culturally, if not mechanically, dwarvish character. Was my last character I saw to the end of their adventure. So dwarves have a soft place in my heart. So Murray is going to be a special character for me going forward. Speaking of characters, I did note kind of something I love that Brennan does in his DMing style is in moments of, you know, exploration and travel in D&D is usually noted as some of the hardest to make interesting when playing through. And something I've noticed Brennan does in Worlds Beyond Number, and sometimes even in Dimension 20 when there's going to be a travel sequence and he's going to skip over it because there's no point in really playing through it, as almost sort of a setting up of a internal montage. He'll have an internal monologue and he'll go around and ask the characters either generally or specific questions about where their head is. He does this in Worlds Beyond Number pretty frequently, which is a wonderful look into Abria, Erica, and Lou's characters. And I want to say in the most recent season of Dimension 20, Cloudward Ho, I recall him doing it a couple of times as well, if not going all the way around, isolating a couple of characters, maybe like Alethra and Maxwell one episode, and then maybe some of the old guard another. And so we get this for the soldiers table, which is a really neat introduction because we've only jumped an hour or so, but this is their introduction as their table. So I did note down kind of what we got about their headspace, which also tends to be how Brennan susses out what storylines his players are leaning towards, and so how he can feed and play into that. Um, so we see the first one with Laura, this interplay of the idea of Thimble holding purpose as a shield against grief, um, which I have no doubt means we are going to see a Thimble breakdown. My guess is not until after the Sid Casimir situation is resolved. Like, she is going to be focused and she is going to be mostly fine. Maybe a couple cracks here and there, but this is Laura Bailey. She is going to break down and break our hearts when Thimble can't hide from what she's feeling anymore. And I am trying to prepare myself now. Um, Interestingly, with how Tayor talked about his brother and how he envied his perception of his brother, and Travis phrased it very interestingly as like, this is how Sid, or how Tayor perceives Sid now based on what he's learned and his own viewpoint, being jealous of him finding this purpose and showing this loyalty. Um, like, he fixates on that even in other people, perhaps to a degree more than is even present, which makes sense for a paladin, but is a very interesting thing to play with, where, you know, paladins, it's oaths that they draw their power from, beliefs, convictions. There's not necessarily a god involved there. And lions being creatures sort of known iconically for their community, their pride. It's even in his name, Tayor Pride Sire, this idea of loyalty to a group and purpose in that and in helping someone else seems to be so far something he fixates on, like admiring in other people, including in Thiazi, and also giving to other people with his pledge to Wick, with the way he seems to fall right back into uh, sort of lockstep with people from the Falconers Rebellion faster than some of the others even warm up to. Uh, with Wikander, we see that he is in the mindset more of running away from rather than running to at this point. He doesn't quite have a goal. I remember once, I don't remember if it was something I jotted down or something I read somewhere, but that running away is hard because away is not a one direction, it's every direction at once. Um, but he is very clearly looking for something to be running towards and still holds fast to the idea that he believes in truth. And when I wrote that down, I was still on my Sam might be playing a charisma based cleric um, conspiracy theory from, I want to say, my third episode reaction, where I thought maybe Sam was going to be proving everybody wrong. This is like, oh no, your power's from your bloodline, not from your belief. Due to some mechanics in the second half of the episode, I am fully prepared to pull back on that conspiracy theory. But I also would not be surprised if, even after I sort of recant from that, it turns out to be at least part of it. Um, we have Brennan sort of setting up and playing off with Whitney the idea of learning about consequences and good deeds and why do people do the right thing if it doesn't immediately benefit from them, and doesn't that mean it's not the right thing? Um, Brennan, tell us you're a philosophy major without telling us you were a philosophy major. Uh, but it is always interesting to see how he plays with views of morality and consequence and what makes it worth it and what are you aiming for with different characters and different concepts. Characters that are breaking away from what they thought was the truth and morality, or what they were indoctrinated into believing was, and finding what they believe. And for those who know World Beyond Number, no, I'm not talking about Wikander in that. I'm talking about an Abria character versus someone who has tried their whole life to be a particular perception of moral and is learning to lean into what some may consider duplicitous uh, methods for moral purposes in Ame from Worlds Beyond Number as well. So it'd be very interesting to see what aspect of morality and good deeds Brennan wants to explore with Whitney, and what Whitney wants to explore as tyranny. And based on some reactions she had both in and out of character, I want to say it was probably both, based on the fact that her character was not present for the second set. In the second half of the episode, I find tyranny a very interesting vice slash virtue name for this character, given what she seems to hook onto the most that we would consider traditionally moral or good or laudable. Uh, with Cadigan, we get the not altogether unexpected revelation that, surprise, surprise, the Ranger is far much more in his element outside the city than within it. Though we do get the revelation that the excitement that he feels for this mission is rare even when he is in his element beyond the city in the wilds. Um, Including the fact that like we get the quote, he's where he wanted to be and he didn't know that this was what he wanted. So we get the sense that um Cadigan may have been separated from himself or from a core part of himself for a while. It's very interesting, um, given that based on what has been said outside of the episode and some of the shorts that have been released, we were told Robbie gave Brennan the most backstory out of anyone. And I would say he's one of the characters that the least of it has come up yet. That we know the least about, and we certainly know, based on what was said, probably the least proportionally to what exists. So I'll be very interested to see, as the Soldiers Table explores further, starting to pick into what happened to Cadigan after the Falconers Rebellion. And maybe even a little bit of who he was and why he was in the Falconers Rebellion to begin with. Before we continue on with the Soldiers Table, we go back to Dol Makyar for the splitting off of the Seekers and the Schemers table, which we got officially announced who would be in what in the end of the Overture recap video they released. But here we actually see the internal reasonings for the peeling off. There were a couple of interesting things noted I picked up on that I just sort of either made me want to look out for things in the future or made things make more sense retroactively. The first thing I noted down is Brennan referenced that Dol Runya, which we'd already heard, where Tayor's old boss, Liza, the old orcish woman from episode 1, a life out of spite orcish warrior, is going to be retiring to where the Circle of Ancients is based out of, where a lot of Taisha's family is. After they left Dol Makyar, they went to Dol Runya. We are given confirmation that is the capital of the sort of region that used to be the Orcish area. Dol Makyar is an important city, but it is not the capital city, which answers a question I didn't realize I had, which was noting that while the Council of, or the Chamber of the Lords Advisory to the Revolutionary Council is a political force within Dol Makyar, and presumably at least has some influence over the rest of the region, most of the Sundered Houses have secondary homes in the city, but not their primary ones. Aranessa repeats it here, but we heard reference in episode 2 or 3, episode 3, when Julian's father came to get him out of the brothel, that he said, when we're in a city that is strange to us, why would I not expect to find you in the house we keep here? So this is not where the Davino's house normally is. It is not where House Royce normally is. We know it's not where Tacona's house is normally based because Octus left the Taconases to come to the school. He didn't just run out to another part of the city. He has not been to his family's home in 5 years. So that makes a lot more sense, that the main households of the Sundered Houses would be based otherwise. We even know the Halavars are new to the city because Wickander was giving them advice on how to gain influence in a city they were coming to new. We get confirmation this is the first mortally, or accomplished by mortals, resurrection. Incomplete as it was, this is the closest mortals have gotten. So there has been resurrection in the past, but it was always accomplished by divine means, and therefore was a more complete, which makes sense if you think about it. The only, outside of the spells that are on the druid spell list, the only resurrection spells available are exclusively to what are considered the divine casters, depending on how you classify druids. There is obviously a split in this world, but it does appear that druids don't really seem to mess with resurrection, but rather more a cycle of reincarnation, based on what's been said. I'll be fully ready to amend my perception of what the old path is, but based on what Taisha said about the Aussie and what Liza, I hope that's her name, said about, like, whatever I am in the next life, I hope I run into you. It does appear there is this belief in regeneration and reincarnation rather than the reincarnate spell that will literally pull you back into an adult body, mind and memories intact. And we get a little bit of Brennan playing with what it is to be undead, which, as somebody who uh, not was not first introduced to Alex through the Vampire the Masquerade actual plays he's been in, but that is the majority of what I have seen him in. It is always fascinating to me to hear different dungeon masters take on what it is to be an undead specifically, and that sort of mix of existential and body horror, where like it's presumably a body, but it's really kind of not. So, um, yeah, having heard even Alex's himself take on it with Project Ghostlight, their Vampire the Masquerade actual play that's got a whole season out on YouTube that he runs, and Abria and Luis are players in, uh, which is they're working on their schedule for season two, given that now, but um, very interesting. And I'm not someone that necessarily leans into that genre of game as something I want to spend most of my role playing time in, but it is fascinating to me to consider on some levels. It's not a genre I am particularly skilled in grasping, but I mean, I'm playing in a Curse of Strahd campaign now with a character that has gone through unwillingly inflicted body horror as part of his backstory. So um, it's something that I've been giving thought to recently. Um, just note that I liked the moment where Octus making the insight check into his own connection with the stone came with the wisdom save, and as I even wrote down, can you face what's within? The way those rolls worked out, where Brendan's like, yeah, no, the reason you failed that insight check and succeeded the wisdom save is you figured out in time. Bad idea. Don't look into that. You don't want to know. Um, and notably, we get some questions answered, at least theoretical answers proposed by a NPC. So a bit of the voice of Brendan, and I believe him even giving insight to some PCs. Again, this is on a first rewatch, or first watch, no rewatch. Um, and then we pick up that the reason the Stone of Night Song was left behind in Octus's body was whatever was supposed to happen was supposed to desecrate and destroy the Stone of Night Song, not put it to use, but unmake it. And in the most blasphemous way possible, essentially. Um, which does answer the very tactical question of why leave the big magic rock behind and take the not magic at the time dead heart. Um, so it would seem more rather than repurpose a position of a reaper or a guiding spirit. The Draconuses are looking at absolutely stopping souls getting out of the underworld, which makes sense from a power play because the more souls that are in the underworld are in their army. Um, and I just love the phrasing of you safely landed a tank on a rooftop as an explanation of and picture of at the very last moment what they pulled off. Um, we get the first couple hooks of how to explain not just why people are on the mission, but why they are connected to each other. Again, if the Stone of Night Song is at the heart of the Seeker story, obviously Octus is gonna be there because that is physically tied to him. And Taisha, unsurprisingly, is going to be following her surrogate son, especially because there's a chance her biological son is also tied up in it with the visions of Aligar. But we get Valus, who's also interested in the stone. It makes sense that she's on this mission as well. Because that stone is connected with Octus, now that gives her that personal connection We're already starting to build these connections there. And like Julian says later, once he gets past the point of blaming Octus, now he's using Octus because the Taconuses are going to come after him. Great, I got my sword. I'll be ready. Um, which is a nice foot in the door to a relationship that could go a lot of different ways. And Matt has gone on record with saying he doesn't have a plan for a positive or negative arc for Julian. He wants to see where the narrative is pushing him. So it's a very compelling but neutral hook into this party. With the then pragmatic one that Aranessa brings up of, we can't, neither of us can stay here. The caravan at the Valmar Pass might have some connection, and then we gotta go check in with other people, and that's in the same direction that this vision is all tying together. So we've got very compelling reasons for all the Seekers to be on this mission and to be with each other, while still not all being on the same page, which allows for some dramatic movement within that circle. Um, Almost not exactly a 2-2 split, because while Valus and Julian don't have as negative a dynamic as Julian has with Taisha and Valus has with Taisha, it's certainly not the same positive that Taisha and Octus have, but it can be very interesting to see how this all plays out. Um, the one thing I caught from the conversation between Azune and Julian the first time is Azune's promise, I will speak the story you choose to tell. As sort of saying, like, I'm not going to contradict, but it was spoken in context of both the current moment and their past, which has started to make me wonder if what we think we know about the end of the Falconers' Rebellion, or at least the end of Thiazi's part of the Falconer Rebellion, might not be what actually happened. Because Zune says he was there and he saw what happened, and that prompted immediate defensiveness from Julian, which could be read as, oh, you were on Thiazi's side, you hate me. But now I'm starting to wonder, did Azune see something that wouldn't paint Julian as the hero he is to the other side, to the Sundered Houses, in the capture of Thiazi at the end of the Falconers' Rebellion? I don't know. Be interesting to find out. Given that Taisha's traveling with the Seekers, maybe we'll even have a chance to find that out. Again, the party needs to go east of Devalmar, so we're pulling in the caravan hook from the first couple episodes. And we get an interesting confirmation that the Sundered Houses were not a unified front during the Shapers' War. And it does make sense who was some of the houses that were on one side, Taconis and Halavar being on the pro-god side, with them both being priestly houses prior to the fall of the Shapers, makes sense. House Royce being tied to Fairy makes sense that they're not necessarily pro-divine, given that we know Fairy predated the gods. When Brennan listed in episode 2 entities that predated the Shapers, the Fairy were one of them. Interestingly, Einfazen and Cormoré were also against the gods, which again really makes me wonder what their power base was. The only thing we've seen from Einfazen so far is a hint of militaristicness to them, but in these sort of houses, like, everybody has their guards. They're like, we see House Divinos as a similarly militaristic family. We don't know that that's what Einfazen's power base was, and the only thing we have seen from Cormoré in a flashback is an act of sorcery that happened to involve dragons, but does that mean they're tied to dragons? I don't know. Bolaire, go talk to that lady at the museum. I want to know. Um, and Aranessa had a line with Valus about there being a distant and, like, ancestral connection with them, with the Royces being tied to the Fae and Valus being an elf. Again, confirming that in Ahriman, as in several other lore locations in D&D, elves have a very strong connection, if not descent from Fae individuals, which is very interesting because they have a shaper goddess. And mind you, they are called shapers, not makers. Did Sylvestri, oh gosh, now I'm blanking on all the goddess names. Did the elven goddess not make elves, but change fairies, some fairies, into elves and then call them her children? Are they her made children or adopted children? Um, which again would put this campaign world in conversation with campaign 3, where there's this whole like, did you make us or did you change us from what we were before? So it could be interesting to see Brennan's take on that idea, if that's where he's going with it, or if the goddess of life was just very closely tied to the Fae, as the Feywild and the fairy tend to be usually associated with life magic, and in this instance are, as opposed to the Taconuses and undeath, as the elves are. Um, uh, my only other note on the first half of the episode was that Aranessa made a very good point about this being a quick strike on the House Divinos and House Royce, rather than a long drawn out plot. The Taconuses would have had max 2 weeks from Theozi's arrest to put this plan together, and we saw how slapdash the rescue had to be put together in 2 weeks. So this was an opportunistic grab, but for what remains to be seen. Octus was not the prime goal of this strike then, because there had to be some amount of planning into this. At best, this was 2 plans that converged in one place at one time. The plan to do this to Octus and the plan to do this to the house. And it just so happened Octus was at the house, so both plans got to happen at once. Which makes me wonder, was it just taking out and silencing rivals? They were obviously making a move, because I'm willing to bet money that the stopped caravan at the Devalmar Pass, like the rest of the caravan that didn't make it to the city with them, was due to Kona's intervention. So, be very interested, as apparently half of the Sundered Houses also are, in learning what the Taconuses are up to, which may end up being discovered by our Seekers group, Bolaire, Hal, Murray, and Azune, who again have very clear and distinct reasons for staying within the city, and I am fascinated to see how their stories play out. But we leave both of those tables at break and return to end the episode where we began with the soldiers' table. We get confirmation that Timony is a kingdom that they will be traveling through. So Gormalay is either a region within it or a city within it. And they mentioned the Pilgrim's Road, the road they ruled out and didn't take, leading to sacred sites of the goddess of the Forge. So I'm going to say this is probably Dwarven land, given that tends to be the domain dwarves are most associated with. Interesting that it is a goddess of the Forge, as I believe most typical dwarven deities of that domain tend to be male entities. So I'm fascinated to see Brennan's take on this. Again, the note Cadigan saying outright that he personally does not have a dog in this race when it comes to the tracking of Casimir, the finding of Sid, resolving the situation with the Aussie. And again, we know Robbie gave Brennan the most backstory. So I'm fascinated when he does get a dog in this race to find out what dog it is, as it were. I have a feeling we are going to get probably only hints of it until after Sid and Casimir are resolved, and I'm willing to bet at that point, either we'll have a lot of little things add up and boil over at that point, or we're going to get a major hook pulling us sideways. Given that we know Cadigan was just in this region, I have a feeling that might be the next hook after, kind of at the moment where Thimble's like, okay, we did the thing. Now I have to figure out what I'm doing without the Aussie. And then we get hit with Cadigan stuff. Um, we get word from our criminal friend that gets released from the gibbet that the carriages with Casimir also had Taconis guards. So if uh, Casimir, probably jumping in challenge rating with his new magical gear that he got, wasn't bad enough, you're also dealing with Taconis's when you catch up with him. Oh boy, that'll go well. And of course, the deeply ironic quote that they call out in the cooldown, Octus can take care of himself. Side-eyes the line, thank you for coming to my funeral. As we get into the movement through the forest, this is going to be one of the few mechanical things that I'm going to spend some time discussing. Because this is the point where I started to lose faith in my Wiccander is actually a cleric, you guys. Um, Conspiracy theory. Because of an offer Sam made in character, so he was very, like, Sam's commitment to not saying, having his character say mechanics, but try to put them in world. And then something Sam actually ended up doing when it became unnecessary. So when they were talking about, do we move at the faster pace, even though that could incur disadvantages on stealth, on survival, he said he could offer little boosts if they did choose to do that. And then when they were told to make the stealth roll at disadvantage, he specifically says, I get rid of my disadvantage. Now, this could be a couple of different things. He's either got the ability to just nullify disadvantage on some checks or stealth checks specifically, or grant himself advantage, which would then nullify the disadvantage, because in 2024, as in 2014, you don't count how many advantages and disadvantages stack. The moment you have one of each, it's a flat roll, no matter how many more else of each you get. So I did some digging on the officially released subclasses for both Cleric and Sorcerer to see which was the best fit for what was said in both instances. The only Cleric one that would work is Trickery, because their Channel Divinity can grant advantage on stealth, which would cancel out disadvantage on the stealth check, which is where Sam used it, and could be interpreted as his offer of canceling out. Basically, he could cancel a little bit of the disadvantage on stealth and grant a boost. But the situation in which he offered a boost, there were multiple checks that were mentioned: stealth, survival, and I want to say even checks versus exhaustion. So this also could be read as an ability that can apply to more than just stealth checks, which would actually push it more towards Sorcerer. Also because Trickery really doesn't work with Wiccander as a character. Like, if he was a cleric, he was going to be a light cleric. Unless the Trickery cleric is him learning to lie from tyranny, but that's like multiple convoluted things, and he wouldn't be that subclass at this point. So the Wild Magic Sorcerer can grant themselves advantage on any d20 test, uh, which they regain that ability once they proc a wild magic surge. Now, my understanding is they grant themselves advantage. So Sam wouldn't be able to give that to a group. And specifically, that is granting advantage, not canceling disadvantage. And there is a sorcerer subclass that does do that. And that is the Clockwork Soul, which has the ability a certain number of times a day to simply nullify advantage or disadvantage on a roll. Neither one would be an interesting choice of sorcerer subclass given what we know about Wiccander. So I also did look into Clockwork Soul, which doesn't have a 2024 version yet. Or a Divine Soul Sorcerer doesn't have it yet. Now they've got Chris and Jeremy working. We know they've done homebrew subclasses for this. And that Alex confirmed he was using the Unearthed Arcana Necromancer Wizard. But as of the 2014 rules, the Divine Soul doesn't have something that would cancel out a disadvantage or grant something, and it's not that he cast a spell. Because when Sam casts a spell, he does at least call it out as casting a spell. So I'm intrigued. I'm very intrigued what this might mean, mechanically speaking, is going on under the hood of Sam's character. We get our encounter with Brook Meadow, the Naiad / Nixie, and confirmation, which Brennan gives a little later when discussing what Hawthorne's Glade is, that there were more fairies than just Thimble stuck in the mortal world when the gates closed. And they have set up little sanctuaries for themselves from both big folk and from the undead. Sanctuaries like Hawthorne's Glade. We get Sam's drinking implement of choice. It's a chalice this campaign. Oh boy. And then we make it to Olbin's cottage. And for Worlds Beyond Number fans, the chicken's trick of fluttering over a false ledge beside the chicken coop and just luring predators to. Yeah, that's the cute and funny version of an absolutely horrific illusion trap that his characters barely avoided walking quite literally into or sending a beloved NPC into in the last chapter of Worlds Beyond Number. That Cliffside Cottage, people. Brennan, I'm guessing you're going with the it's a tactic that makes sense in a world where illusion magic exists. But it's terrifying. I'm afraid of falling. Like the falling sensation is a viscerally uncomfortable thing for me. That would be a horrific way to go for me. No, thank you for bringing it back again. We get another name drop in relation to the storm rack that was referenced earlier as being just outside of Dolmarkiar, that the Barrow Dell of the storm rack is getting worse. Part of me wants to read that as whatever source of magic spins up the storm, because he does talk about he can tell that by tracking the weather patterns of the storm. But we also know Aligar, Taishan Hal's son, is a member of the Barrow Guard, which fight against undead, and Barrow being a burial mound, a word for a burial mound. Really makes me wonder if it's both and. There's a lot more going on with this storm, magically speaking, than just we have a perpetual storm and it's kind of unpleasant to travel through. We have a perpetual storm fueled by magic of the undead. It's dangerous to travel through. So it'll be interesting to see if that is something like the Caravan of the Kingsmen that, as Brandon talked about, the cooldown, because this is West Marches style, there will be things you see whiz past you, and the target they're about to hit is one of the other tables. And you're just like, oh, that's weird. And 3 sessions later, that's trauma for a different group of characters. So it'd be very interesting to see if the Barodel is also a setup for a different table. Um, my guess, if it is, it's going to be Seekers because Barrowguard, Barodel, Stormwrack, I believe, also started going east of Dolmakiar. I want to say that's all tied together. Um, Brennan really setting us up for heartbreak with the end of the episode. And I walked as blindly into the trap as the rest of the party did, because when he started talking about his daughters being into toy weapons for their toy soldiers, I read that as Brennan justifying on the spot and like pivoting that of course Thimble was gonna find a toy sword here. And as one of the little girls that twisted paper clips into swords for her Barbie dolls, yeah, no, the little girls wanting their toys to be absolute like heroes and warriors and like, yeah, no, this is somebody who has actually seen little girls at play. It's not always the Tea Party um stereotype. Um we can play out some pretty violent scenarios with our toys. And the I, as somebody who also sells toys at Ren fairs now, you also get the stereotypical Ren fair little girls that will come with you in their pretty princess dresses and flower crowns, straight from the axe throwing booth. Yeah, no, these gnomish daughters, at the moment I thought that was a in the moment pivot, I'm like, no, still totally makes sense. I was one of those kids. I see those kids every day. I'll buy it. Um, and then he hits us with the year, month, day count, notably 15 years plus, and then they heard the Falcons cry. And when the Falcons War rebellion occurred and ended roughly 15 years ago. Brennan, I did not need that kind of heartbreak before I went on vacation. And Robbie, don't you be setting me up for something else for ironically, if you are, if I had a nickel, if this ends up being the case for lone wolf-ish ranger types that are revealed to have a missing and or deceased daughter that is part of their driving force in the last 72 hours, I'd have 2 nickels, but it's not a lot, but it'd be weird if it happened twice, because we're getting into sorry, the ranger in our Curse of Strahd party has a backstory. Is like, okay, you two, we're playing into an archetype here. Is there a common ancestor inspiration character I'm maybe less aware of? Specifically, of course, calling out Cadigan's fixation on this doll, and the fact they teased him about in the cooldown that he did not deny when Laura asked him if Cadigan had a daughter, and Travis especially teasing him that he refused to even look in Laura's direction when she asked him that. So the table's assumption at this point is that Cadigan has a daughter. Um, and just briefly touching on the cooldown, the last part I'll talk about, specifically why I said I believe Tyranny's reaction to Alban's story about his wife, I believe, was both in and out of character, because Whitney had a very similar reaction and talked about how like it would break her heart. She was glad Tyranny didn't hear about the daughters because it would break her heart. But a very interesting, Tyranny's most relatable characteristic is her fascination with, in a like cares about, like actually cares about way, with connections between people. She was excited that she made a friend in Taisha, where almost against her will she began to feel sympathetic to Wikander, where she was so happy to find out that Open had been in love and to find out the story about his wife and sad to hear that she had passed away, and Tyranny curling up and sleeping at the foot of Wikander's bed, and then playing sleep paralysis demon when he woke up. She's still herself. And then talking about how much it would have broken her heart to hear about this father that doesn't dare leave home to look for his daughters, because what if they come back when he's not here to welcome them? Which also really got to me, in that the fireworks, or the exclamation mark on the sign. Not thinking about that, because that really will get to me. Sorry, father-daughter relationships are something very close and dear to my heart, because I'm fortunate enough to have a very close relationship with my own father. Um, but yeah, for somebody whose name after the vice of tyranny, given that we see how sort of apropos enmity, cruelty, and agony his names were, tyranny seems to value genuine connection between people rather than a lording of power. She is aware of power dynamics and how to play into them and how to use them. But it seems that she truly values genuine connection. And I'm fascinated to see what Brennan does with that going forward. Um, so that is all I had for this episode. Again, I have no real sense of when I will be able to get to episode 6, hopefully within my normal time frame. But if I don't get to it till a little later into next week, I do hope you will understand. And again, we'll go back to the old recording setup with a better microphone. I apologize for however this turns out. This is the best that I've got. Um, but if you made it this far, thank you all for watching, and you have a wonderful week. Bye, y'all.